Hi, welcome to Indie Comic Ninja in conjunction with Unknown Comics. And everyone knows me. I'm Dexter Jacobs. This has been my podcast for quite some time. Philip, which do you prefer?
Philip is fine.
Philip. So yeah, why don't you introduce yourself and explain what your website is?
All right, my name is Phillip Allen. I am the founder of Unknown Comics. I write articles every 2 weeks about comic creation, whether it be the defining structures of comics, tools and practices used by comic creators for their production and distribution, and any industry trends that relate to comic creation. That's what I do.
Awesome. And what's the website again? I'm sorry if I didn't catch it.
The website is unknown-comics.com.
Okay. I think that was my problem. I forgot the hyphen just now.
No worries, no worries. To be honest, it cost $3,000 to get the domain name without the hyphen. If you can imagine.
As a web developer, I hate URL squatters. They're the worst.
They're the bane of all humanity.
Yeah. So if you're one of those people, you can just stop listening. I don't care.
Yes, please.
But aside from that, so unknown-comics.com. No, and the cool thing about you and me is that we got started really close to the same time. And we seem to run into each other on Twitter or somewhere, like right at the start, which is really interesting.
I found you on Twitter. I followed you. You followed back, and we started talking. And you liked my articles, and you put me on your first newsletter. I thought
the only newsletter.
The only newsletter.
Yeah, because this was supposed to turn into like a subscription service for comics. But I got a little bit more into the interviews and the podcasting aspect of it, and so I just stuck with that. And then comicscentral.com kind of started doing what I wanted to do ultimately. And so I've kind of just decided to sit tight on the podcasting and let other people who know what they're doing do a better job. And so I just am podcasting now, not doing that newsletter, but yeah, you were in the first newsletter. And I was really looking forward to your content filling up most of my newsletter if it kept going. And I might pick that back up eventually once I have more time, but
well, I'm lucky enough that now I got 30 articles you can pick from.
Yeah, that is the nice thing.
It's been a while.
Yeah, well, I know for me, I think I realized I'd been podcasting for over a year now because the first con that I went to was SpringCon in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. And I remembered when I went there last year, I only had one podcast that was live, and I went again this year and I realized, hey, this is the first time I was even promoting my thing. So how long have you been going? Do you remember like when you started?
I remember when I started. Well, I started because I was going to school for business marketing. And my last semester, I was studying in a class called internet marketing. So we had to start a blog and market it. I bought the domain, the website, on January, and I started writing in February. I couldn't tell you exactly the date, but that was the day when it started.
That was about like how I got started. I think I bought my domain in January or February and had my first episode out like in maybe April. It took me a little longer.
Hey, I can only imagine. All I have to do is write and release. You gotta record and edit and all that.
Yeah, I try not to do any editing, but it happens sometimes.
It happens.
So yeah, anyway, this is the first of maybe a few episodes at least. We'll see where it goes, where we're going to talk about some topics to help people who are getting started in comics, to keep things moving, I guess. And so today, I think we agreed to talk about comic creating resources.
Yes, we did.
And I mean, I guess first and foremost, your website is a really good resource. You have 30 plus articles already.
Yeah.
So that's always good.
Yes, it is. It's been a long time. I've been writing for a while.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because like we both got started with our thing kind of for the same reasons, where we wanted to get into comics, but we just didn't know how
much about them.
Yeah. And so my tactic is to just talk to people. And I'm not so good at, I guess, writing articles about talking to people. So I just record them and release them into the wild. So whereas you seem to be a lot more research based. So then you're doing your research and writing the articles, which is really cool. So then I guess, how would you like to start talking about comic book resources?
Well, I guess I'd like to start by saying that there's not much out there.
Yeah.
There is just not much out there. And what there is out there, you can't trust.
Yeah.
Because people don't talk about it. People like to keep, trade secrets secret. There's no major publishing companies don't really share their numbers, don't share how they market their work. They don't talk about how they even sell their work. I mean, people can think about how they do things, but you just don't know.
Yeah.
And whatever publications there are is just recycled material from other books and other articles that are very, very common. So you don't really get much new material.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I mean, one of the most popular comic resources that I came across when I first started writing Unknown Comics was Scott McCloud.
Yes,
God bless the man.
Any bookstore you walk into is going to have that book, or the couple books that he's written. Yeah.
Yeah, and the man knows how to write about comics. I sat down in one day and read through the entire Understanding Comics book he had, and it got me hooked. I said, okay, I cannot write like this, but I want to write about this.
Nice. That's interesting to get inspiration to write about comics from a book about comics.
Yes, it is, and I'm very, very happy I did anyway.
Yeah.
But that was the first legitimate resource I actually ever found regarding comics and comic creation.
Yeah, I think my wife, even in school, she was an elementary eds teacher. They even covered like chapters from that book.
It's just
like,
great
to even like teach to little kids for like art classes and stuff, which is interesting. But yeah, it's a good book. If nobody's read it, they should. I mean, just as a basis, it's a good book, I suppose.
Yeah. He also wrote another one called Making Comics.
Yep.
And I got halfway through that. I haven't actually had any time to sit down and read through it all just yet. I've been very busy lately. But either ways, Scott McCloud's a great resource.
Right.
But the only problem I had with Scott McCloud when I was reading is that, it taught you how to begin the conceptualization of comics, and how a story is told within a comic. And that gives someone who's very interested in making comics like myself a very good basis for scripting. The problem with Scott McCloud that I had is that he didn't talk too much about the actual practice of creating comics.
It's good theory, I suppose.
It's very good theory, and it's very good because it explains it in a way that you can actually understand.
Yeah.
And it's written as a comic, so it just makes it all the more fun.
Yeah.
And but that was my problem. There was no very, very talk about the practice. Very little talk about publication. Very little talk about printing and distribution and selling.
Right.
And that was a real big problem for me because I was studying business marketing, and I thought, if I'm going to talk about comics, I should also be able to talk about how they're made, how they're actually made, and how you sell them.
Yeah.
Because that's a very big deal. Now, the latter of which is a lot harder to find out about than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
The reason why I had a lot of problem learning about selling comics, for example, is because, again, like I said earlier, people don't like to talk about it. People don't like to talk about it, and I honestly don't know why. I don't find it a very good idea that people don't talk about how a very specific niche industry doesn't sell things.
Yeah.
I don't like how they don't talk about it. But that was my problem with Scott McCloud. Another resource that I came across when I was in a bookstore was by a couple of comic creator duo. It's a couple who is also a comic creating duo called Comfort, Love, and Adam Withers. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
No, I haven't. I saw that in your notes and I was intrigued, but I didn't know what it was.
Oh, these guys.
Comfortandadam.com,
awesome.
it looks like.
Comfortandadam.com. Yeah, these guys are great. If I had to recommend, every time I talk to a comic creator, I ask them, "Have you come across Comfort, Love, and Adam Withers?" And tell me no, and I recommend the book to them. It's the complete guide for to self-publishing comics, and it talks about everything. It talks about the very character design. It comes to illustration, scripting, marketing, publishing, printing, and all about it. It covers almost everything.
Yeah, it looks.
And I
pretty
emphasize almost
comprehensive.
because, and it's a good book. It's a nice, like a couple. I think it's a 300-page book, but it's got
Dang.
illustrations, it's got side notes, it's got suggestions from other creators besides themselves.
Mhm.
I mean, they're an established comic creating team, so they work on comics together and everything like that. So they're actually out there working every day making comics,
Mhm.
and they made this book, and it's great.
Yeah.
But one in a lot of topics they talked about, I couldn't find very easily in other places. Like, for example, they discussed printing comics, and I based one of my articles about printing comics and the printing options on what they wrote, and I expanded it based on other research that I found throughout my time reading about comics. They talked about marketing and selling comics, and basically some of the perceptions that are in the comic industry that aren't exactly correct. And one of them I actually wrote an article about was basically reading comics for free.
Yeah.
How it's a big issue in the industry right now because people feel like they're being robbed.
If they have a free comic?
Not if they have a free comic.
Oh.
If they have a comic and it's being distributed illegally online.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a very common practice.
Interesting.
And
I don't think I realized that.
Yeah, and it is a very common practice, and a lot of people get very, very testy when people start talking about finding a new site where they can read comics for free.
Right.
And one of the things they talked about, was it's not that bad because at least they're reading your comic.
Yeah. Well, and I know what's up?
No, at least they're reading your comic, and if they're reading their comic and they like it and they read more about it, they're not just reading your comic. They're talking about your comic. They're sharing, the knowledge of the existence of your comic with someone else that likes comics.
Right.
So you are getting something out of it, just not directly.
Yeah. Well, and I know that I've run into an issue where some people have been really overprotective of their comics, and it's like, and then I feel like it's impossible for me to even find a place to read it, even legitimately. And so I think sometimes even maybe not the whole comic for free, but it'd be nice to have access to something so that I know, especially with an indie comic, because it's nice to have a bit a teaser or something to like at least let me know like this is something I'm interested in and it's worth dropping however much money, just because I feel like indie comics are usually a little bit more expensive anyway.
I haven't actually gone around to try any indie comics as far as I know. As far as I know, I mean, I may have and just not realized that it was an indie comic.
And by indie, I guess I mean very small press. If you go to like a local con, the local guys selling their comics, because you usually have to get them printed in smaller batches. I feel like, or it seems to
pod printers.
Yeah, and so then you end up having to sell like a 23-page thing for like $9-10 sometimes, and so, or go the whole graphic novel route and then have it cost $15 to $20. And I know for me, when I go to a con, I don't have quite that much money to be throwing down at every booth. So
it's tough.
Yeah, and so like I found that a lot of the people that I tend to maybe give money to are either the ones that I've already bought a book from in the past, or the people who have like a web comic, so then I can see a bit of what they've done there. But and so I mean, I can see the upsides to having your content for free online, and I definitely see you getting mad about it because you've poured your life into it, kind of, well, at times life or years.
Yeah, sometimes it does take that. Yeah. But no, let's get back to the comic creation resources. I got a little sidetracked there, but to get back to the point, there are resources out there.
Yeah,
they aren't very well known, and there isn't much, and they don't cover everything. Regrettably, they don't cover everything. Yeah. And one problem I have is that if I find an article online or I talk to somebody, they don't really have much reasoning or logic or evidence to back things up. Back what they say up. And for example, one of the articles I recently wrote about is big deal for me. Actually, was I finally wrote an article about selling comics. And the article was called "Selling Comics." Who is my customer? And the article discusses exactly who a comic creator's target market actually is. It's not what people normally think it is. It's actually the comic retailer.
Oh,
it's not the readers.
Yeah,
because the reader, for example, I made the argument in my article, if you have 1,000 readers in a particular area, I know I'm being overly generous. I mean, these are 1,000 people who are able and possibly or currently reading your comic.
Yeah.
And there's 10 retailers in that same area that deals with those 1,000 readers. Now, you could spend your time marketing your comic to 1,000 different people, or you can focus your attention on marketing to 10 people who can then market your work for you. And also, retailers actually buy your comic. Readers maybe buy your comic.
Right.
So when you want to have, if you're going to be a comic creator, you're selling a product. And you have to know exactly who it is you're selling your product to so you can better figure out how to sell your product to them. I can't tell you how long I searched for an article that actually made any sense. A lot of people said, no, you have to sell to the retailer, you have to sell to the reader, but they wouldn't give you any reasoning why.
Right.
And this one article I found finally explained it the way that I just did, relatively, and it made sense. But I can't tell you how many dozens of articles over months I had to look for that information for.
Right.
For quite a while, I've been meaning to write an article about selling comics, and I just couldn't get to it. Because I couldn't find something reliable, and I don't want to write about something that isn't going to be reliable.
For sure.
Because it just doesn't. It just hurts anyone interested in reading my work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's the problem I have with comic creating resources, is that there's not much out there. A lot of it's repetitive.
Right. And
the rest is just unreliable.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing is just how little there is on marketing, I guess, because I remembered I did a short poll a little while, or I don't know, quite some time ago now, about just kind of like looking for content ideas when I was wanting to do a little bit more writing. And I assume that people would be more interested either in reviews or just the making of comics, I guess. But I think like 50% of the people who took, it was just a Twitter poll, I think, but quite a large number of people were interested in marketing, because, which makes sense, I guess, just because people want to be able to sell what they've made. And it's interesting to me that there's so little information on the marketing and getting it out either into comic shops or really ultimately into the reader's hands. And I have a number of friends who have some comics, and they'll go to to just like a lot of local cons, and they'll make some sales, but it seems like they're usually maybe breaking even and really not, and just kind of, it's a hobby that is expensive. Whereas then I have a friend that's been able to get into like New York Comic-Con, and he sold out of his entire box of books that he was selling. And so like it almost seems like you need to go to the huge cons, otherwise it's just a really expensive hobby. Or like you were saying too, figuring out how to get into those retailers, which I've also heard is a hard thing, just because a lot of retailers aren't indie friendly. And they'll just buy what Diamond is sending them, or even worse is like they're just buying what the average consumer will buy, which is just like X-Men and Superman, and they won't even go for even the more interesting, maybe not interesting, but just the more unusual things coming out of Marvel and DC, which is too bad. Or even like Image and stuff like that. But so it's difficult, I feel like, and it would be nice for sure to have a good resource just to get that to figure out that marketing. It's nice that you were able to find it and share it on your website.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to learn about selling comics, one of the sources that I found that was really helpful it's a different podcast that I think has got canceled now, but they're still got their website and everything. Yeah, called the Panel Podcast. Okay. One of the stars in the podcast is a former Marvel. Oh, nice. Sales guy. And he shared how basically he talked a bit about selling comics and stuff like that. But just a tidbit of information that I'll share. I was planning on sharing my next article was that for indie comic creators, they shouldn't worry. I mean, Diamond has a giant list of retailers, and one thing a lot of people do apparently is that they'll call the first 300. The guy from this podcast said don't do that if you're an indie comic creator. I mean, because the reason is those top retailers are buying the top comic.
Oh yeah.
They're not gonna care, and if they do, you're yay, but you're gonna be calling 300 people for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
An alternative that they recommended is that call 300 to 1 to 1,500.
Wow.
Because those guys are generally the smaller stores.
Yeah.
People who are interested in talking with you sometimes. They're usually be a little more friendly and have the time to talk to you.
Right.
Or they can even just be the, what's it called, novelty stores.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where people who, don't sell, they'll have a shelf for comics.
Yeah.
They'll have a shelf. And those guys have the time to hand sell your work more than the bigger retailers. I mean, that's just one bit of resource. I mean, for one example, I podcast there. I feel like I could trust them because the guy actually worked in sales in Marvel.
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties of a dog.
No worries.
But yeah, so we're back, and no, so you're talking about calling not the first 300 like top retailers, but the next, what was it, 300 to 1,500?
To 1,500, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's interesting too, because I'm trying to think, like, I feel like that's just a common thing in general, like when you're just getting started out, like you can get lucky with the first couple if you hit them at the right time and they can hear you, but really spreading your net like a little bit wider, I suppose, and getting more quantity over quality, I suppose, is what you'd be ended up getting there.
Well, that's what you're interested in if you're trying to sell your comic. Doesn't matter who is selling your comic as long as they're selling your comic.
Yes, for sure.
And I mean, there's things you can do to get their attention that wouldn't actually involve direct communication with them, which is great and all, but if you're going to be trying to sell a comic, you got to make sure you put in the effort to actually talk directly with retailers on a regular basis.
Yeah,
you have to be making that effort.
Yeah, and I have a friend too. Like whenever he travels, he'll just pop into the comic book shops in the town that he's in and make that direct sale to the retailer and talking to them in person. And he's had some pretty good success with that, rather than either trying to get them on the phone or just mailing them a package or an email.
And it's all great. That's just one example. Like, trying to get back on track on comic creating resources. I mean, that's just one example of where I've been looking for a while. I mean, before I even started writing about, writing for Unknown Comics, because I started because of an assignment, I've been meaning to start my own comic and trying to research this stuff, and it has been very difficult. And it was only once I started Unknown Comics that I actually got a chance to tap into the industry, to enter the industry as I have by providing this kind of resources. And I learned there's a lot more to comic creating resources than just writing and podcasts and newsletters and stuff like that. I mean, there's actual services available that can help a comic creator. From anything being directly related to actually creating comics, like letters, artist directories. I think I know of a particular comic publishing company. It's an indie comic publishing company. I'm just trying to remember the name of it. It's not Comixology. It's Alterna Comics.
Oh, yeah.
You heard of them?
I'm a big fan of Alterna Comics. They just started reprinting in newsprint, actually, which is really cool. Oh, yeah.
I received the newsletter for ad space for that.
Yep.
I was really interested in it, but I just thought, I'm not a graphic designer. If I try making an ad, I'm just going to end up wasting space for someone else.
Oh, well, yeah.
Well, one thing that they have, for example, is they have... let's see, I'm just opening the link so I know exactly what I can give you guys exactly the information you deserve.
Is it the Make Mine Indie thing?
No. It's resources.
Oh, okay,
They
sorry.
have a resources page.
Oh, yeah,
and in this page, they have a directory for a whole bunch of artists, writers, stuff like that. That if you are interested in making a comic and you just need a little bit of help, because let's use me as an example. I'm a writer. I can't illustrate to save my life.
Yeah.
But if you wanted some help, this would be a great resource just for any comic creator out there. Like if you want to write but don't want to illustrate or don't have the time to illustrate, Alterna Comics, for example, has a Alterna publishing company, for example, has a great resource for you. And it doesn't have to necessarily be written or verbal, oral help. It can just be someone who can actually connect you with someone who can actually help you.
Yeah, well, and it looks like their list. I mean, I just clicked on like pencilers, and it's just a huge list. And there's like a link to examples of each person's work, an email address, and some of them have their Facebook page or Twitter page. So, no, it's really cool. That's a nice resource. You
were breaking up there just a minute. Is that a problem?
I don't know. But basically, just it's a huge list of like right now I'm looking at pencilers. And it's just a really big list and good links to each person's website so you can see their work and their portfolio. Mm-hmm. It's nice. Which is funny because I love Alterna and I've been on their website multiple times and I've never, for some reason, noticed this.
No, but I mean, if you want to start a comic, I mean, if you don't know how to do a particular portion of the design, I mean, this is a great place to start. Mm-hmm. Or just want to get a co-worker to work on a comic.
Yeah.
Co-write a comic. This might be a good place to start as well. I mean, another resource that I also found that I have a lot of respect for and appreciate it very much is Blambot.
Oh, Blambot. He's my favorite. Yeah.
Oh my God, this guy is the king in lettering. I respect him a lot. He's got one article about the different types of comic grammar related to lettering.
Yeah.
And that one article, I'm so thankful I found it.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you. I mean, it taught me a lot of things that I already knew, but a lot more about what I didn't know when it comes to comic lettering and the grammar and the meaning and it's what's the word I'm looking for? Its significance.
Yes.
to the comic designing process.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The nice thing about this guy too, is it Nate Piekos?
Nate Pieko, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's his name.
He, from what I understand too, is like, I mean, he's a letterer. He does like big name comics and stuff too. Mm-hmm. So he's not just like some dude who is fascinated by lettering. It's like, well, I mean, he is, but he has the experience to kind of back up what he's writing the articles about. And he has a really good resource for fonts in general. And I think like you can pay for some of them, like if you want to use them on shirts and merchandise. But like for just your comic, it's free to use as long as it's an indie comic. Which is really cool. Mm-hmm. Most of it.
I did not even know that.
Yeah,
I thought you had to pay for that.
No, I'm pretty sure. I mean, when you go to download a font, I suppose from him, make sure you read the user license. I guess
the terms. Yeah.
Well, yeah, he has pro fonts and free fonts. I guess. So yes. I
didn't know he had the free fonts.
So,
now I have to go. I have to go looking for that.
If you go to the fonts page, it'll just have like a little P for pro, I guess, and a little F for free. And I think just the free ones, you can't just use them anywhere. They have to be. It can't be on the merch. You have to pay for it then. But as long as it's just being used in the comic, I'm pretty sure it's free.
Wow, he does have free fonts.
Yeah, it's nice.
Wow. Now that's one less thing I probably have to pay someone else to do.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge list of fonts. Even the free ones, there's a lot of nice ones there. So
wow, that's great. Thank you for that. Actually, that's gonna come in handy later. Well,
sure.
Well, let's see. What else can I say about comic creating resources? I mean, yeah, it's not just it doesn't have to be educational necessarily. It can also be services and tools available to you online. And I try my best to cover that kind of stuff on my website, for example. Like I've covered storyboarding.
Yeah.
And one that was actually a lot less commonly known, but an emotional graph. I don't know if you've ever heard of those.
No.
No? It's a very good scripting tool. I mean, that way you can just put a line down the middle of a page and put points and graph them out, basically giving yourself a visual representation of what's actually going on as a particular scene plays out. Where characters' emotions are kind of going, or whether they're positive or negative. You can kind of write down notes on a particular state of mind that they're in. So it helps you basically edit your work to make sure that it's comprehensible.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you'll read a comic and you'll be reading, why is he making that face, or why is he saying this, why is he acting like that? You map it out with an emotional graph, you get a visual representation of it. And for someone like me, who can get a little overwhelmed when it comes to writing and lose track of where I am.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how valuable it was for me to find that, and I was very excited to write about it as well.
Yeah, well,
And that's
what?
no, I'm just saying, like, that's one of the most popular pages I have on my website right now. For some reason, I'm actually surprised that it was so popular.
No, and that makes a lot of it makes a lot of sense though too, because like when you're doing dialogue in your head or even writing it down, like just writing down the dialogue, I think you understand the emotion behind what the people are doing and saying. But I feel like sometimes when you're reading a comic, all of a sudden somebody's like angry about something and you have no idea why, or they're reacting in a goofy way. And I can definitely see like doing this graph to show, kind of like be able to see like, oh, I'm kind of jumping a little too fast into that anger or something. And so you can kind of like streamline it a little bit nicer.
I mean, that's just one example. And it can just be learning about tools, about what other creators are doing. I mean, when it comes to what other creators do, I usually ask other comic creators to write an article for me, simply because I'm not a comic creator.
Yeah.
I'm at least not yet. I like to say not yet. I'm not a comic creator, and for example, I came across this inker who uses ballpoint pens.
Whoa, weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's unusual. It's very unusual. I mean, mind you, I'm letting you know. I also came across a guy who used Nintendo DS to illustrate his webcomic.
Weird.
Yeah, but it's still, just to give you an example, comics don't have to be made with the standard industry standard tools. I mean, you can use some weird stuff. And learning about that stuff is really helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, and kind of what you're saying too is like what it seems like is these people are using either the tools that they're used to using or the tools that they had on hand, and which kind of gets to the number one rule of creating, which is just do it. Don't wait around to have the perfect item to do the thing, but just do the thing with what you got, and then then you're started, and eventually you'll have a thing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's true, and it's really, really helpful. I mean, having come across these people who kind of go outside of the norm.
Yeah.
And I really, when I do write about this kind of stuff, I do hope that it tells people you don't need to pay $60 for a pack of pens that'll last you 2 weeks.
Oh yeah.
You don't need to pay that kind of money. You don't need to pay for a fancy sketch paper. You don't need to pay for anything crazy. I mean, eventually, once you start making money, you can go ahead and up your game if you wanted to. But at that point, you've already got a whole bunch of people who like your work for the way it is.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, these resources that you can find online, and the only problem, I haven't mentioned this probably 2-3 times already, but it's just, you can have some problems where they're just not very complete. They can be very inspirational. They can be incomplete. They can be sometimes helpful, but they don't back it up.
Oh, for sure.
And then there's cases where you'll find something really, really useful. And you've got to hold on to that. You got to save that, bookmark that page, and do whatever you can.
Yeah.
And share it with everyone else, please. Share it on Twitter or Facebook. I don't care. But you got to get it out there.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that you're making a resource. I mean, it's kind of what I was trying to do with this podcast as well. And it's good to be sharing, and it's good to be talking to people too. I mean, kind of basically what we're doing right now, and sharing that Alterna has the resources page and that Blambot has free fonts, stuff like that. Real valuable resources for sure. Yeah,
especially for someone who doesn't necessarily want to pay for the lettering or wants to try it out themselves. Well, I mean, it's really, really helpful.
And for indie, I mean, it's all about pinching pennies right now.
Yes, it is.
And because I know for me, I mean, I have zero money to get a comic going, because I want to do writing as well, and it's free for me to write. But then to
everything else,
to move on past the writing phase, I need to find an illustrator. I need save up some money to get an illustrator to draw a couple pages, and then do a Kickstarter for the rest of it. Stuff like that.
One thing I've been planning on doing for my own personal comic creating project, is that I'm thinking of getting a Kickstarter started just to get some draft designing done.
A Kickstarter for the draft? That's interesting.
For the draft designing, simply so that if I find a good artist, who's able and willing to do some work with me, he can show me, he can give me something to present.
Yeah.
Because if you're just a writer and you're trying to get the Kickstarter going just to get the comic going, and you have to pay for the drafts, it's tough. It's very expensive. I mean, I've been looking
yeah.
around. Artists demand to get payment, and they deserve it.
Oh,
But they
yes.
demand payment, and that's
Yeah.
something a lot of writers don't have.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm planning on doing is whenever I finish or start, let's be honest, when I start and finish my comic script, I plan on getting a Kickstarter going just so I can get some draft design and looks,
Mhm.
so that if I like what a particular artist can do, I can sit down and say, okay, I will use you. I'll
Mhm.
use what you gave me, and I'll start a Kickstarter to get the comic going now.
Right.
Because when you're just writing, you don't have much to share.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have much to share, and that can be a little tough
Mhm.
for Kickstarter. One thing I'm doing right now with my website is I have a Patreon,
Yeah.
and that's for me to continue doing my own work. So if someone actually likes what I'm doing, they can pay me every month to continue doing what I'm doing. And sometimes if they pay a certain amount, I can give them something back.
Mhm.
And that's going.
Yeah.
I just started a couple months ago, and I haven't gotten much out of that. But it's going, and I'm promoting it every day, and I'm trying to figure out better ways to promote it. And it takes time. And again, not much is known about the comic industry as a whole.
Mhm.
And there's a lot to the comic industry, not just creating comics.
Right.
There's a lot. There's, like I said, there's the resources, there's the services, there's the tools you can use. And one thing I'd like to tell a lot of people I talk to about this is that the tools you use don't have to be directly about comic creating.
Mhm.
One thing I try to get a lot of people in the industry to start doing, for example, is to start using a tool called Buffer or Hootsuite,
Oh,
so they
yeah.
can schedule their social media
Mhm.
posts and tweets, and so they can set a schedule for each account,
Yeah.
write down the tweets, and leave it alone.
Yeah.
Come in show up once a day, check your notifications, and a lot of people don't know about this stuff, and it really ends up helping them a lot.
Oh.
And just one of those things. The resources don't have to be exactly directly for comic creating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it kind of gets back to using a ballpoint pen to ink your stuff. Like use the resources that you have, use what you already know. And it's always interesting too. Like, I was talking to a guy at a con. Well, my number one resource for doing anything with comics is talk to people at cons. But,
Hey,
just because I
can afford to go to the cons, good for
well,
you.
yeah, there's that problem as well. Local cons, I'm in the Midwest, United States, and so I feel like for some reason there's just like a ton in my area, and so it's just kind of a matter of gas and then the $5 to get in. And it's amazing though, those really small cons, like sure it's a lot of local people, but there definitely seems to always be like one or two guys who are just passionate about making comics, and they've been doing it for a little while. And so it's always nice to be able to figure out who those guys are, I guess, and then just stand and talk to them forever. It seems like whenever I go. And like one of the things I was talking, his name's Anthony Harry. He's out of Minneapolis. He told me to basically, just whenever you have time, just sit down and write or sit down and draw, but just, even if it's just 5 minutes here or there, do something so that you're making progress. And the interesting thing that when I was talking to him about it, he said, like, it's just like friendship. It's just like, making friends isn't just like from these big experiences here or there. It's from those little interactions throughout the week or the day. And you're building into it. And so it's interesting to me that you can even take the concept of making friends, which is a very like everyday normal thing that everyone does, and turn that into like how to make comics. So just like all those everyday experiences that people have, that's a resource. I think it's just a matter of thinking about it a little bit harder, maybe. But yeah, I don't know. Sorry, that's maybe a little bit more abstract of a thought.
No, but that's actually pretty. I mean, it's true. I mean, it's very true. I mean, a lot of resources I've come across say the same thing. It doesn't matter if you spend 5 minutes, half an hour, or 3 hours a day. You got to just put the time every day.
Yes,
every day.
I mean, and
doesn't matter.
That's true of anything. I mean, the famous, 10,000 hours to become a master of something.
Yeah, the Outliers book. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time, and you're not going to do it in 1 or 2 sittings.
No, you can't. And I mean, but yeah, Let's see. What else can I share?
Getting back on task.
I have a lot to say. I'm just trying to sift through it all in my head.
Yeah, I think one resource that I've noticed is really good for like just getting a lot of information is Jim Zub.
Jim Zub.
Yeah, he's a writer, I believe. So just jimzub.com. But he has blogged or written a lot of articles just about how to basically get into comics. He has what he calls tutorials. And there's just a big long list of how to break into comics, how to find an artist. He has 6 different like comic writing articles, 4 different story pitching, stuff like that. And some of it's just about getting your comic made. It doesn't really look like he has much on marketing. He has a few on promotion, but they don't necessarily seem to be about like what you were talking about earlier. But I'm trying to think, like, find exactly what he's done as far as comics. Glitter Bomb is maybe his big indie book that he's done. But I've always found him to be a really good kind of outspoken guy who has talked about his experiences kind of breaking into the business for sure.
Well, let's see. The problem I'm having with comic creating resources is a lot of people start looking for the how to create comics for dummies.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that being any good.
Well,
I can't imagine that being any good.
Yeah.
And you get those how-to books, and you know they just show you how to illustrate. They tell you to draw.
Right.
But that doesn't. Again, my problem is that it doesn't talk about the nitty-gritty details about when it comes to comic creation, because it's not just making the comic. It's never just that.
Right. Which I think Jim Zub is maybe the most extensive thing I've ever found, but yeah, I mean, he for sure doesn't cover exactly everything, but it's good for some.
When you say Jim Zub, is it Z-U-B?
Yep, JIMZUB.com.
Oh, there you go. I was trying the S-U-B there for a second.
Sorry. I don't pronounce my Z's very well.
Okay, yeah, he does have it. I have come across his website once or twice. Yeah, I have come across it. I mean, if you're telling me he's not too bad, I might actually use some of his resources and cite him.
Yeah, which I mean, if you've been looking into indie comics for any length of time, I'm sure you've run into things. Even if you're into like just podcasting about comics, I feel like you should run into like an interview of him here and there, kind of thing. He's just a very vocal person in the industry. But yeah.
All right, I might have to follow him on Twitter now because I didn't know. I mean, the thing is, I come across a lot of people.
I have
come across a lot of websites, but again, like I told you, I have to be very careful with trusting them.
Oh yes,
that's my problem. I can have them in my radar, but I just can't trust them unless I have something that collaborate. That collaborate. What's the word I'm actually looking for? Make sure that they're actually legit.
Yeah.
They're actually helpful, and people can say things, but you can't trust it.
Yep.
So I've been very careful with what I've been finding and using for my content.
Yeah. Well,
tools are easy.
Yeah.
Tools are easy. You can make some sense of how they would work and how they would benefit people. So that's one easy thing to write about. Oh man. One thing that's actually a little tougher for me to figure out, though, when it comes to comic creating resources, is the printing process.
Yeah, that's something that's always kind of, from what I've always looked into, eluded me. It's always interesting because I run into some people who just like, it seems like they literally just go to Kinko's.
Oh, jeez.
And then there are other people who, like, you see a lot of, is it Kablam? What is that? There's
Kablam.
Yeah.
Kablam's the big one.
Yeah.
Big pod printer.
Yeah, and then I know a lot of people that go through Amazon or other things that aren't necessarily even meant for comics, but it works, I guess, kind of thing. But yeah, so have you run into anything solid?
I have run into. Well, if you want to talk solid, one good resource that I would recommend is the Comfort and Adam book, the book that I recommended earlier, the how to self-publish a comic book. So how to self-publish comics. Forgive me, I'm trying to get the title right. They talk about printing quite. There have been the most in-depth discussion about printing comics.
Interesting.
Telling the difference between the different kinds of printers available, pod printers and offset printers. How the cost calculation does come into effect.
Yeah.
They discuss when to switch from prod to offset, and it's really, really helpful. Very, very helpful. But one issue that I have with printing is color.
Yeah.
Color and the bleeds and the spaces. I can't make heads or tails of it. I have read a lot of different articles about it, but
Oh, okay.
I feel like I may have to ask someone to write it up for me.
Like a how-to article to like
A how-to
prep
article.
your
I mean,
pages.
just an explanation. Just
Yeah,
an
yeah.
explanation. I mean, that would be just really helpful. Like, I'd ask someone who's actually gotten their work printed, can you
Mhm.
please write an article about basically from the beginning to the end? Explain this to me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't explain it very well.
Right.
At least it leaves me with my head scratching.
And it's one of those things too that like all the people that I have talked to who've gotten stuff printed, it's always a process that they've stumbled on, or it's taken a little bit longer than they expected it because they get that first proof back and it's just horrible.
Butchered mess, yeah.
Yeah.
A butchered mess. No, I mean, the problem is, again, I would be willing to try, but I don't have my own comic and find out on my own.
Yeah.
I mean, once I probably get a little more money thrown at me via Patreon, I'll sit down and actually get an indie comic creator and offer to print their comic for them just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
For someone who knows nothing or very little about the process and get it done.
Right.
So I can share that experience. But right now, I feel like I'm going to have to ask someone else to write that article for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll have to go around or just wait for someone to, suggest it.
I can. I mean, I know a number of people who've gotten stuff printed, so I can ask around to see if anyone would
Yeah,
be
tell them
willing.
if they're willing to put the time to write an article about it, I'd be willing, very happy. Actually, not willing. I'd be very happy to publish it. I'd be very happy to release that article.
There we go.
Yeah, no. The next little while, though, for the next, not this week, the next week and the week and 2 weeks after that, I'm writing an article about how to sell directly and indirectly to comic retailers. So I'll be, that will be busy for me.
Yeah.
Trying to organize that information again. I mean, I like to write the articles, the article outlines ahead of time, so the first draft doesn't take too long.
Yeah.
And it's not such a jumbled mess.
That's
But when it comes to no kidding. One problem I've had also personally, and from what I found from a lot of content providers that provide resources and for comic creators, is that they stop releasing content. And once they stop releasing content, depending on how long ago it's been, it can make that content lose its legibility. It stops being reliable, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
Because one thing that makes content so reliable is that it's frequently published or edited or updated. Like right now, I'm trying to sit down and rewrite my old content to meet my current standards. And so that way people will actually see that, oh, this guy's actually touching up his work. Thank God.
Yeah.
And so we know that what he's been writing is still true.
Yeah. Well, it's always like hard when you're looking into like Kickstarter and you're reading an article and you realize like the article is written before they updated their terms of service or something.
Yeah.
And that,
actually, very much. Yeah. So yeah, that is one problem I have with the content online. Published content. Here's the thing. I went to college and in my school I was lucky enough that they had Scott McCloud. Yeah. On the shelves, and I got that and I read that out in a couple of days. Yeah, it's really, really great. I didn't have to buy it. I mean, I bought making comics, but not understanding comics. Right. And but I also pulled out a whole bunch of other books that they luckily had. At least that's what I thought. I thought it was lucky. What ended up being the case with a lot of other books about comic creation is that they recycled the same stuff you would find in Scott McCloud. Yeah. They just use a lot more words and a lot more complicated words and a lot of different case scenarios. So they could fill up a 300-page book of nothing but text.
Yeah. Which is funny to run into that at college because that would get you an F.
Yeah, well, no, it was a legitimate book, and it's for research purposes. It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. But again, it doesn't make any sense to expect different content for someone who's using someone else's content.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, at least for my articles, I like to add whatever's missing from multiple different sources. Yep. But no, this one book that I found, it was just recycled, regurgitated material. It was a real shame because at that point you don't learn anything.
Yeah. It gets difficult like when you get kind of into like just slightly deeper than the surface level stuff, I guess.
Yeah, but the thing is, Scott McCloud kind of already covered that.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the thing.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to focus on now is basically the nitty-gritty details, which is, stuff that comic readers really should know because it definitely benefits them.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I feel like that's really helpful. I write about anything from different tools that they can use for scripting or illustrating to realizing who they should be selling to the what's going on with the industry right now that they should really know about. Like, I've been meaning to write an article about the I think Comixology has got more of a handle on it. It's the different kind of comic reading experience where the panels kind of can change. You read panel by panel. I forgot what it's called.
Like when they animate the panels a little bit, or just
they can animate the panels a bit, but the view screen shifts panel to panel.
Yeah.
And how that's been changing the comic industry a little bit with the different kinds of reading experiences that, and how it affects even illustrators, because that kind of illustration is easier for them.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, then you're dictating where they're looking rather than having to draw it in a way that guides the reader.
You have a lot more control with the reading experience in that case, yes.
Yeah, interesting.
And even just the way it's illustrated, apparently it's easier for comic illustrators because it's the same panel with a slight difference sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And for them, especially if you're digitally illustrating your comic, it's very easy.
Just copy and paste.
It's just a matter of layers and just illustrating different layers and removing one, showing one, removing the other.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
And for them, with the same background, for example. Like, just for an example, that's just one thing that is very interesting about that. But I've been meaning to write an article about that, but I haven't gone around to it. I think I should put that on the list now that I think about it. But yeah, no, there's one issue is that a comic resource can lose its reliability if it's not managed regularly.
Yeah.
And it's a real shame when that happens because a lot of the stuff can be useful, but I can't trust it. And that's one of the reasons. Do you have any questions regarding comic resources that you'd like me to answer?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like you covered a lot more than I was expecting. Maybe.
I have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to talk to you, I guess, about this stuff. And I think it might be a good thing too, because I'd like to talk to you again about other topics. And so maybe it would be nice if any of the listeners to the podcast would want to send in any questions about this, and we can cover it at the beginning of our next talk.
That'd be great.
And so if you shoot an email to info@indiecomic.ninja with a question, I'll be sure to ask that to Phillip Allen or see if I can't answer it, I guess. And we'll see there. Also, just I guess if anybody listening to this podcast also has resources that they enjoy, you could email that to us or hit us up on Twitter or Facebook, I suppose. I know I'm more active on Twitter. And we can either look at it ourselves and talk about it, or just to have it out there for others to enjoy is a good thing. Okay, so I guess then where can people find you on the internet other than your website, which is unknown-comics.com?
Well, you can find me on Facebook, Pinterest. Yeah, I was actually quite surprised that I chose that one too. And find me on Twitter at unknowncomic5 because Unknown Comics was taken. Facebook. I also have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/unknowncomics. No hyphen in that case. And I also have an email. You can shoot me an email at phillipallen@unknown-comics.com. Phillip is PHILLIPALLEN, and you got it there. That's so any way you can find me. That's one way.
All right, that sounds good to me. Thanks for being on. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Dexter. Have yourself a good one.